I like seeing all these happy faces. Terrific. Well, thank you so much for, first of all, attending the Sugarland Home and Garden Show. There's so many different things that one can take advantage of, obviously, right? You're looking to do home improvements. One thing that a lot of folks, a lot of times you don't even think about is your plumbing in your home, whether it's a domestic water piping or your sanitary sewer drain lines, because again, pipes are out of sight, out of mind type thing. And the only time that folks sort of start thinking about it is when there's a problem. And my presentation this morning is to cover some options that homeowners now have in dealing with deteriorating or failing galvanized or copper domestic water piping. This is the pipe that supplies water to your home. Okay. I suspect that a lot of the folks here, your homes were built probably in 1984 or 1970 or so. Can I see a raise of hands there? So that's most of you, and that's fairly typical of when pipes start to deteriorate or fail. And so what I'm going to talk about today is something that's called ePIPE. Has anyone heard of ePIPE? Any chance? Okay, so there's a couple of you guys that have already they have an idea of what ePIPE is, and it stands for basically epoxy-coated pipe, and it's designed to deal with failing or deteriorating potable water piping. And a lot of folks will ask us, well, are there some warning signs that maybe I'm having this problem, or is there something that I should be aware of, or at least kind of look for? And a couple of telltale signs begins with maybe some low water pressure in a particular bathroom or your kitchen sink. And the thing about this is that it's rather insidious because it doesn't immediately happen. It's a gradual process. So a lot of times you won't even recognize it until the time that it's really bad. But that's usually one indicator, particularly with galvanized steel pipe. Another telltale sign is the presence of rusty or discolored water. And a lot of times you'll see that in a bathtub. A lot of times you'll also see it in your toilet tank. That's where it tends to really accumulate, because what's happening is the pipe is deteriorating from the inside. So you're losing some of that metal, and it's just basically eroding, and it'll find its way into a toilet tank, for example. And that's really when you really notice it. But sometimes you'll also see it when you open the faucet, and you may notice that there's a little bit of discoloration. And a lot of people sort of tolerate that because you kind of say, well, you know what, I'll just let the water run maybe an extra 5 seconds, and it'll clear up. And it does. But again, that's an indicator. And then, of course, the one that everyone sort of reacts to is when you actually develop a pinhole leak. Because the other two, we sort of tolerate. It doesn't really bother us. But when you get that first pinhole leak, now you have to do something about it because that's causing some damages. And some of the telltale signs of the pinhole leak is usually a spot on your ceiling, for example, and your pipes are up in the attic. You'll notice a spot, and a lot of folks will confuse that, sometimes thinking, well, maybe it's a roof leak. And especially if it tends to happen about the time that it's raining a lot, people will tend to think that it's a roof leak, and they'll call a roofer, and they come out, and it turns out that it's not a roof leak, but rather a galvanized pipe that's leaking. And that's the one that kind of gets everybody motivated to do something. And historically, the way to deal with that was basically you do what's called a point repair, where you just fix that particular segment of pipe that's leaking. And that's certainly a way of doing it. And then there's other options there where, in some cases, the problem will continue to persist, or you'll have a second pinhole leak. And now you're looking at something beyond just that point repair, because the plumbing contractors told you, guess what? You better have my card, and you better put me on your quick dial, because you'll be calling me quite often. And you're going, wait a minute, I don't want to have to go through this, right? So now your options are actually doing the full repair. And this is where the ePIPE has an advantage over a repipe, because it allows us to take the existing pipe, whether it's copper or galvanized, in place without having to tear into the walls or ceilings. and we can totally rehabilitate that system. And it's obviously good for the environment because it's going to allow us to just keep that pipe in place and extend the life cycle. And that's the beauty about that. And it's called ePIPE, E standing for epoxy. And this is fairly typical of both galvanized steel pipe and copper piping. With galvanized pipe, unfortunately, you get a lot of corrosion buildup that tends to just build up over time, and that's what starts restricting the water flow. And those are some of the first things that develop. And again, galvanized pipe has been in service for 34 to 40 or 50 years, in some cases longer. So that's typical. It's not abnormal. It's just that's the normal process of the pipe deteriorating from the inside. With copper pipe, you don't get the corrosion buildup, but you do get the pinhole leaks. Copper basically gets a patina inside, and that's what actually will create the pinhole leak. A couple of things. Like I said, some of the telltale signs are the spots in the ceiling, water spots. Sometimes folks will do a port repair, something like that, which is, by the way, that's not up to code. And then again, you see some of the telltale signs, the beginning of a blister in the pipe. And in some cases, you can see it before it actually becomes an active pinhole leak. But that's provided that the pipe's exposed or that you can actually see it. But a lot of times, if it's under insulation, you'll never see that. And then, unfortunately, once it does leak, it can cause quite a bit of damage because in some cases, particularly if you have insulation, which most homes do, you develop a pinhole leak and you may not notice the spot in the ceiling. But what happens is that insulation starts to soak up that water. And so you'll never see the spot until you see basically half your ceiling on your kitchen floor or your dining room floor. Because it just gets so heavy that it finally just goes right through the ceiling. And these are some of the things that are fairly common. When we get up in the attic, for example, and your water heater is up there, we'll go up there and look at some of the pipes. And if the pipe's exposed, you can see where you might have some evidence of the piping starting to deteriorate. Like, for example, that's a common one that we see a lot. And that's something that you guys can actually, if you get the opportunity, just check some of these angle stop valves, like by your toilets or underneath the lavatory sinks, because if you see some corrosion occurring there, you want to do something about it, because that's, again, that will continue to get worse, and that's when you'll have a leak. But if you can do something beforehand, whether replacing it, and that's really what needs to happen, you can avoid that expense of a leak, and at least you kind of are aware of some of the things that are happening. And for you gentlemen, if wives, encourage your husbands to get up in the attic and just do a little recognizance of some of the piping up there, because again, some of that piping is exposed, and you can look for some of the things that we notice, like again, you can see the formation of a blister. You can see some corrosion building up on the fittings, and then in some cases, you'll see a clamp where maybe a previous pinhole leak was repaired. But again, those are indicators that the system is failing, and it's just something that you want to be able to address. Here's, for example, situations where we see where, again, the rust is usually pretty pronounced in some of these pipes, where it's quite obvious. I mean, that in the toilet bowl, and inside the toilet tank, or if it comes out of your tub. And this, in some cases, for example, a lot of us are kind of becoming empty nesters. So you may have a home with, let's say, 3.5 bathrooms, but you're now basically just using the master bathroom for the most part, and occasionally you'll use the guest bath. But then if you have a company coming over and say, hey, we got some of the kids that are coming over, or friends, and you go up to the upstairs bathroom and you open that tub, chances are you're going to see something like that. And that's not atypical, because what's happened, that water has just sat in that pipe for months. So when you first open it, you'll get that squirt of really rusty or discolored water. And again, that's fairly normal. It just means the water's extracting some of that metal. And so that, again, is somewhat common, particularly in a bathroom that's not used frequently. And that'll clear up again. And that's to be expected. What you don't want to see is something like this in a bathroom or a sink that you use on a daily basis, because that means that deterioration is rapidly occurring. And so those are, again, just the things to be aware of. A lot of times people ask us, well, why does that happen? Why is it that my pipes are deteriorating? Why am I getting the pinhole leaks? And there's been some studies done. And there's not a single indicator or variable that causes this. It's a multitude of factors that cause the pipe to deteriorate. The pH of the water, depending on where your water is being sourced from, is certainly a contributor to the deterioration of the pipes. For example, a lot of times if the water treatment is rather aggressive, and again, oxygen content, very typical, especially with where you have a lot of hot water, where you're basically releasing some oxygen into the pipe, so that starts the corrosion process. In cases where, let's say you're running a pump, a lot of homes, especially larger homes, will have a recirculation pump on their hot water side to get cold water from one part of the house to the other, particularly from the water heater to, let's say, the furthest bathroom. And they used to have just pumps that ran constantly. Nowadays, they have pumps that are programmable, which makes a lot more sense. But several years ago, the only pumps that were available were the pumps that constantly ran. Well, that's a lot of velocity going through that pipe. And over time, again, that starts creating that erosion. In some cases, the pumps were not measured or sized properly for that particular pipe size. That, again, exacerbated the corrosion process. And then, as I mentioned, the chlorine and chlorinated byproduct disinfectants. We did a lot of properties in Florida, and we could almost bet that when we noticed that the city would announce, like Fort Lauderdale, for example, would announce that they were doing some water, they had an issue with their potable water plant. And we knew that they were going to start treating the water with excessive amounts of chlorine, obviously, right, to address any bacterial contamination. And we could almost bet that within 2 weeks we would have a rash of calls of people with pinhole leaks, because a lot of the homes are plumbed with copper. And so the higher concentration of disinfectants or chlorine exacerbated that process, the erosion process. So that's a lot. That's a contributor. And then again, temperature as well. For domestic water purposes, you really should have your water heater set at about 120 max. Okay? And that's pretty doggone hot already. What happens a lot of times, depending on who installs your water heater, it's very common for them to just crank that thermostat all the way up. And you might be, basically heating your water to about 140 or so degrees. Well, that's not very good for the pipes. Not very good for you either, because it's scalding. So what most homeowners wind up doing is just temper the water temperature by using more cold water, right? But that's something that, again, if you have a water heater installed, whoever installs it, just ask them to make sure that you keep that at about 110, between 110 and 120. And that's really hot enough, to bathe, to wash your hands, and that type of things. But again, high temperature will exacerbate the problem. And that's why sometimes we see the pinhole leaks from rusty water more so on the hot side than we do on the cold. Now, the other thing, can anybody guess what the next contributor would be? There aren't any wrong answers, actually. So if anybody can just guess as to what the next factor would be that contributes to the pipe erosion. Well, temperature's up there. Good answer. He's paying attention. Okay. The other contributor, which...
Another 5 pH would be a problem.
Say again?
If it's
Yes, and pH is up there. pH is up there, so we got that. But there's one other one, and this actually is just part of the process. Age. The age of the pipe. There's just no way around it. So that's the other factor that comes in. So when you combine all these factors together, now you have the genesis of a pinhole leak, if you will, or the pipe starting to deteriorate. Now, traditional, conventional repairs, as I mentioned earlier, you can do the point repair, where you just address that particular pipe segment that leaked, and that works. The only problem with that is that, unfortunately, once you develop a pinhole leak, you're going to have more, and it's just a matter of time. And the insidious thing about it is that there's no rhyme or reason as to when that's going to occur. We've had clients that have called us where they had a pinhole leak on a Friday evening. They noticed it Saturday morning. They call a plumbing contractor. They come out there and repair it, and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's great, it's done." Only to discover another pinhole leak Sunday evening in a different location. And again, and then there's cases where we've had someone that will talk to us and say, "Well, we had our first pinhole leak 2 years ago, and this is our second one." So no rhyme or reason as to when they occur, but they will occur. And that's something that you just have to be aware of. So again, traditional repairs, which can be basically doing the partial or complete replacement if you don't want to do the point repair. And that's what now you're looking at, either doing partial repipe, let's say in the attic, for example, but you're not doing anything with the vertical or the riser pipes behind the walls. And so that's one way of dealing with it. The other way, rerouting of the leaking pipe section, and that's particularly common to homes that are plumbed with copper piping, because that piping is underneath the slab. So when someone develops a pinhole leak underneath the slab, the only way to address that, if you're not doing the ePIPE process, is to abandon that particular leaking loop and reroute a new line, typically PEX, up through the attic and over to whatever bathroom or kitchen that loop was supplying. So that's one way of doing that. Unfortunately, these types of repairs, one a partial repair or a complete repipe, are rather destructive and intrusive to the inside of the home, whether it's having to cut through the ceiling, if there's some pipes in the subwall and you have a 2-story home, or your walls. And there's just no way around it. You can't get around it. You've got to make access in the walls or ceilings to get the new pipe in there. So those are some of the things that folks consider. And then, of course, obviously, you're having to dispose of a lot of material, a lot of waste, drywall, et cetera, and landfills and all. So again, those are the things. And in some cases, for example, we have some elderly clients, and maybe their health is compromised to some degree, whether it's asthma or emphysema or some COPD. And when you're cutting into the drywall, you're going to create just a tremendous amount of this gypsum dust. And so those are things that you have to look for as well. Very disruptive because it's messy and so on. And here's an indicator as to some of the things that you have to kind of be aware of when you start doing a conventional repipe. If you do a partial repipe, or even a repipe, it's temporary because the water erosion starts to occur again. So those are some of the things that unfortunately you have to take into account. With the ePIPE process, you eliminate that because we do everything where the pipes step out of the wall, and we're not having to cut into the walls to replace piping, because we're basically restoring that pipe. It's a patented process. It allows us to completely take any deteriorated pipe, whether it's galvanized pipe or copper pipe, and we clean that out completely with a mechanical abrasive process. And we do that all in place. And then that will allow us to basically introduce the epoxy coating into the pipe. The epoxy is blown in. It's an absolute safe epoxy, and we get a lot of questions, is this safe? Absolutely. It goes through the same type of testing that any other potable water component has to go through, which is NSF Standard 61. And they're a global nonprofit organization. Their whole charter is to test products that you and I as consumers come in contact with. There's food packaging, water bottles, or potable water components. The process, again, is where we shut the water off, we drain it, we dry it, we do a corundum cleaning or sandblasting, and then we apply the epoxy coating. The neat thing about it, all the equipment stays outside your home, so you're inside the house, it's completely neat. No problem there. We do everything as far as the only thing that's inside your home is small air manifolds. There'll be one in each bathroom, kitchen, and so on. And then everything else, as I mentioned, is outside. And there's 1-inch air hoses in the house, and they all rest in their own mats and so on and so forth. And you can kind of see where we do everything from right here, right there. So underneath where the pipes stub out, that's where we do our process. Traditional PEX, you're having to cut into the ceiling or walls. There's just no way around it. And the thing is, we do both, so we know what's involved. Now, the only place that the pipes don't stub out of the house is behind your bathtub or shower. A lot of homes with the bathtub will have an access panel that we can access, but you have a shower stall. That's the only access that we make. It's very clean, and any access we make, we're going to patch, tape, and float and texture to paint-ready condition. So all the equipment, all that stays outside, and the various types of equipments, the larger for commercial, and again, the before and after product of a treated, rehabilitated, or restored epoxy-coated pipe. We do everything from residential to hospital, schools, high-rise. So this is technology that's proven throughout. And with that, I'd like to invite you to stop by my booth, 805. If you have any particular questions, you want to address any particular needs that you have, please do so. And again, thank you so much for coming by this morning. Thank you.